Here is our product today that we're creating, Mother's Day blocks. First, you measure and cut your wood. This is a standard 2x3. We're cutting with a miter saw. Then we're going to sand it. I use an electric sander. I use 100 grain sanding paper. We want to sand the wood and then smooth the edges. Now we're going to stain the wood. I like to use the wide angle brush. So you're going to dip your brush into the stain and apply it to the wood. Then you're going to use a cloth to rub off the excess. You're going to let it dry overnight. If you don't, then the stain will bleed through the scrapbook paper. Next, you're going to go into your eCraft Shop Pro and create a new project. I do 12x12 because all my scrapbook paper is 12x12. Go into Shapes, choose Rectangle, unlock it and put your measurements in. The scrapbook paper should be 1/2 inch less the block's height and 1 inch less the block's width. Remember to re-measure your wood before you put in the measurements because sanding can change the size. I create 2 different projects because I'm using two different scrapbook papers. One's for the middle block and one's for the top and the bottom block. I wrote down what pressure I use on the eCraft for each scrapbook paper package I have. Then I take my handy mat, which I've created from the backs of scrapbook paper packets. I just tape 2 together. It's approximately 12x24. I take the first sheet and I just use Scotch tape to tape down the scrapbook paper to the mat. Now we're going to cut the scrapbook paper. Let's go to cutting mode, front, portrait, 0 tabs. When I feed it in, I line it up with the 0 right here. I push it in evenly, making sure it's still at the 0 line. Feed the paper in right. And I put it up to this guide before I start cutting. I change the pressure based on what paper I'm using. And then we go to the eCraft Shop Pro. Send to eCraft. I check front because we're feeding it from the front, and I click off the box. And then we hit cut. It worked really well. We take the paper off. And now we want to Mod Podge the paper to the wooden blocks. This is the adhesive I use. Apply it to the back. Place the paper, and I use a paper towel to wipe off the excess. Now we have all 3 complete with scrapbook paper on them. We're going to cut the vinyl. Go back to the eCraft Shop Pro to create the vinyl. Do it in 3 different lines and put your measurements in. Again, the vinyl should be at least 1 inch less the height of the scrapbook paper and 1 inch less the width of the scrapbook paper. Now we're going to take the mat and tape the vinyl to the mat again. I always buy my paper at photobella.com. They have really great prices. I use a pressure of 1.5 to 2.5 depending on which color I'm using. Feed it in. Go back to your eCraft software. Send to eCraft. Click front. I always cut from the front no matter what I'm cutting. Click the box and hit cut. The eCraft cuts vinyl really well, it does a great job. Now you're going to want to cut off the excess vinyl and start weeding. Carefully weed the vinyl, which is basically just where you're taking out the excess vinyl and then only the text remains. The font I used here made it a little harder because it's skinnier than it usually is. Now you pull off the excess vinyl. Cut off any excess paper. And you get your transfer paper out. Take your transfer paper and place it firmly on top of your vinyl. Now you want to cut each line and separate it for placement. I also use a scraper on the back to assure that it's correctly on this transfer paper. Then I peel off the vinyl backing, leaving just the vinyl on the transfer paper, and place it on your block. When you're placing the vinyl, be careful not to press the transfer paper down too hard on the scrapbook paper or it can rip when you pull it off. Now, once it's placed on all three blocks, get out the Mod Podge, and you want to Mod Podge over the whole thing. It just gives it a nice finished look. Let it dry. I always use 2 coats of Mod Podge on everything, but that's up to you. You can use 1 if you want. Once it's dry, it's done and ready for the ribbon. Cut the ribbon at the ends, and then I add fray checks so that it doesn't fray. Let it dry, and then tie the ribbon around your blocks, and voila, it's done.